Our last Mother's Day that we had all together was the first time that my daughter hosted it at her house in Portland. The girls got together and made breakfast and had flowers, and my husband and I went over, and we had a really, really nice day. Once you lost a child, there's always someone missing.
Happy Friday. Welcome to another episode of Brain Scratch. I'm John Lorden. That was the mother of homicide victim Darien Richardson. And her mother has now become an advocate on a few different fronts. We'll be talking about that as we go through the information here today. But Darien's case is very unique. First of all, it's not covered very well in terms of videos that I'm finding. I did find one podcast on it. That's about it. Thankfully, the podcast did a really good job. We'll be talking about that as well. But for a case that has very unique features like this one does, I'm kind of surprised that more people aren't talking about it. And especially because in terms of the advocacy that her mother's trying to do, that could be helpful. As a matter of fact, one of them could be working against the coverage because that is just such a hot button topic all across the board. But it's kind of hard to disagree with the stance that she's taking. And it looks like, at least according to some stats I found, most of the country agrees with her. So we'll get to all that. But we need to start with telling the story of this tragic loss for this family, Darien. And we need to start with where this occurred. And that is in Portland, not the Portland that I'm most familiar with on the West Coast, but this is actually Portland, Maine. And Portland, Maine, according to Wikipedia, is the most populous city in the U.S. state of Maine. Its population was over 68,000 as of 2020, but the greater Portland metro area has a population of just over 500,000 people. So a lot of people that live in that area. I tried to look up crime stats for this area, and they're really all over the board because you have this kind of metropolitan area. Basically, the information I ran into was South Portland, the crime could be a bit sharper. North Portland, not necessarily as much. And you kind of have pockets swinging both ways. There's pockets that are known to be very nice areas, other pockets where maybe you would have more incidents of crime like this. I was just trying to find some information to understand what's the likelihood of a home invasion in this particular area. Now, the podcast that I mentioned, that is Dark Downeast. They interviewed her mother, Judy, extensively, and almost to the point where the first episode is basically her mother talking for almost all of it. I think the host maybe has 5 minutes worth of dialogue. But the information that Judy gives us in that makes it sound like this is actually kind of a nice neighborhood. Older, like historic type homes there, but they are turned into rentals. So you'd have these kind of, older style homes. You might have several young people that are living together in it. And that's kind of the situation that we were looking at here with Darien's case. She was living there with a boyfriend that she had only met a matter of months before. She met him in the summer of 2009, and they're living together. And of course, this shooting happens in January of 2010. So very quick, very short time frame. But they're also living in that home with 2 other renters as well. So we have at least 4 people that are in there. I don't know the exact layout in terms of bedrooms, which is kind of important because it's got a big question mark for me in terms of how this goes down. But here at rememberingdarien.org, let's take a quick look. And we have a picture of her mother, Judy, her father, Wayne, of course, with Darien here in the middle. Not a day goes by that we don't feel her absence in the world and the empty space where she should be. Life cut short. Darien Richardson was 25 years old when armed intruders fired several rounds into her bedroom. One bullet hit her left hand, shredding her thumb. As she tried to roll off her bed, she was shot in her right leg at the knee. That bullet traveled the length of her thigh and lodged in her hip. Her world violently turned upside down in an instant. And it was so tricky that they couldn't take that bullet out, essentially. They were just going to leave it in her. I really don't hear about cases where that happens too frequently. Obviously, it must have been near some main arteries. There's obviously a huge medical reason why they would do that, to the point of they kept her in the hospital. She was 3 days in the ICU and 18 days in critical care. She was in the hospital a long time dealing with not only the physical trauma, but of course the emotional trauma of going through this. And her mother and sister were apparently right by her side. I'm sure her father was a big part of that as well. But her mother said that there would be times where Darien was just scared that she was going to bleed out. That was kind of, she still had this wound in her, and they were trying to let it heal. I think, as her mother kind of describes it, effectively from the outside in, and that's why this recovery takes so long. But then, of course, on February 28th, 2010, Darien died from complications of her gunshot wounds. Some interesting phrasing here, and that is that her world turned violently upside down when armed intruders with an S, fired several rounds into her bedroom. So on the podcast Dark Downeast, in the first episode, right around the 14-minute mark, if you want to jump to it, her mother gives a description of what Darien told her happened that night. And basically, it was around 1:30. Darien kind of woke up sensing that there was other people and looked towards the door. And it appears that she saw kind of the silhouette or the outline of two people. She was pretty convinced it was two people, and that one of them was running their hands on the wall, almost like they were trying to find a light switch. But because this was an older house, it didn't have a light switch there. It was one of those rooms where you had to walk in and pull on a chain in the center of the room to turn on the light. So then she says that it seems like the two of them kind of backed out of the room. One of them pushed the other in, and then shots rang out. So her information, direct from Darien, seems to be pretty strong that we've got two people that are part of this home invasion. I can tell you in the official documentation that we're going to see as we're going through the articles here, there's really no reference to how many people are in there. We're going to get some other details, and we're going to get a really big clue, a clue that in many cases would be the thing to solve it, but in this case fails us. And of course, that leads Judy to one of the fights that she has taken on in Darien's name since. But let's go ahead and start by learning just a little bit more about Darien. Always breaks my heart to be doing this, but we're learning about her from her obituary. Darien grew up in South Portland and graduated with honors in the South Portland High School class of 2002. She continued her education at Bowdoin College, graduating in 2006, earning her BA in sociology. Darien not only excelled academically, but also in sports, music, dance, and ballet. She's set records. She has all kinds of accolades when it comes to that stuff. She was a member of many extracurricular clubs at school, including the civil rights team. She was also involved in community organizations, including the HYPE program at Williams Temple Church in Portland. But education was really important to her because her big dream was to be a teacher. Upon graduating from Bowdoin, she accepted a position at Waynflete School as a K-1 teacher and then went on to West School. In 2008, she accepted a position with Aetna Insurance as an LTD claim analyst and continued to work there until the date she was injured. I believe she was still doing some additional schooling to get her teaching degree, but Darien was a shining star whose light can never be dimmed. Continuing at newscentermaine.com, she was climbing the ladder at work and had moved into an apartment with roommates on Ratcliffe Street in Portland. Let's go ahead and just take a look at this street so you can get a little sense of it. I just jumped on the street. I'm not on any particular address here, but these are these kind of older type homes that I'm talking about. Some of them have been subdivided. We can kind of see this one here has two entrances. It's almost effectively a duplex. Some of them might even have more than that. I'm seeing some listings that have 8 bedrooms in them. So it just depends on how they've kind of been subdivided up for their apartments. But that alone is just one of the big questions for me is how did this person know the house that they were going to and the specific bedroom that they were going to? And I don't know if the other two roommates were sharing a bedroom or if they had separate bedrooms. If there was 3 bedrooms, that even adds to that question even more. It would seem, and the reason why I'm struggling with that question so much is the 2 people that were injured in this, the one that was killed, survived for a period of time after that. So there was interviews with police. Anything that they would have noticed, anything that they would have seen, there would have been a chance to relay that information to the point that we know what Darien's experience was from her mother. So it kind of blows my mind that here we are looking at this case 15 years later this week, and we don't have an answer for it. How can that be in a case where both people initially survived? One of them is still alive to this point. What is obscuring this case? Why is there this fog that we just can't get through with this case? And to me, it can't be a simple belief that, oh, this was like someone breaking and entering, and this is a simple robbery gone wrong. It just doesn't have those dynamics from the description that we're getting. This seemed like someone wanted to attack them, but even for that, there was two people there. From all the documentation that I'm seeing, it really seems like there's only one gun, and the person apparently struck at least 3 times. We know her hand is shot, her leg is shot, and her boyfriend's arm is shot. But none of the wounds, well, one of them would prove fatal far after the fact. But it just seems like this isn't someone that would have been extremely experienced in this type of thing. And you'll see why I'm so caught up on it when we get to kind of one of the main theories about what's going on in this case. But as you can see here, I mean, this just looks like a cozy neighborhood with a bunch of beautiful homes on it. She was asleep with her boyfriend in that apartment when a gunman broke in and changed the direction of her promising future. You can't believe it, said Judy, her mom. I couldn't really register what the police were saying, so I got my husband up and I said, Darien's been shot. Darien was shot in her hand and leg. Her boyfriend was shot in the arm. Even with the bullet left lodged in her leg, within a month, she was walking again. While she healed physically, new details emerged that shaped the story of that January night. The boyfriend Darien had been dating for a few months knew more than he was willing to tell the police. The Richardsons had met Corey Gerard and were told only good things about him. People we knew that knew him said, yeah, he's a good kid, explained Darien's dad, Wayne. Now, she goes into a lot more information about him on the podcast. I highly recommend you do check out this podcast to hear directly from her mother the details about Darien's relationship in particular. The main points that I take away from it are this is a guy that was supposedly in ROTC in New York, but somehow he was in Maine all the time. It kind of raised a lot of questions. The parents were kind of unsure about, like, how's he here all the time if he's supposed to be in ROTC in New York? But outside of that, it seems like there really wasn't much to question about him. He just seemed like a nice guy based on what they knew about him. Judy and Wayne had sent Darien down to Miami to visit a friend. We all thought it would be a good idea for her to go down and get some sunshine and warmth, Judy explained. And then Sunday morning, February 28th, Darien died. The bullet left in her leg caused a lethal blood clot. Her parents knew the moment a detective showed up at their doorstep. So I know a lot of people are wondering about, okay, well, wait, there's travel here. I've known people that have had to not get on a plane because of blood clot possibilities before. The Emmy was very clear with her mother, no, this is not related to her travel. And they were very clear that we can tell what happened here. And this resulted from the wound. This resulted from that bullet. And that's why they were able to, because you wouldn't actually be able to kick it to a homicide. You would basically be stuck with possibly undetermined, maybe even accidental, if they couldn't really make a, or if they thought there was some other environmental factor that was possible. I'm pretty sure that would have pushed it to more into the undetermined realm. This has been clearly flagged as a homicide. So just trying to head off the conversations that might be happening in the chat down there, not related to the airline travel in any way. A big thank you to the Press Herald for covering this case so well. This article actually from a few years after that. More than 2 years after Darien Richardson was shot, family members and friends don't want people to forget the lively, accomplished young woman who had a beautiful smile and moved with the dancer's grace. Assistant Police Chief Vern Malik admitted that the case has gone cold and detectives have run out of leads. A case where you have basically an eyewitness survivor that is kind of hard to understand. And there's another very big, important clue that's going to come into this. But with that surviving eyewitness, what is going on with the boyfriend here? And is that possibly part of the explanation for the trouble that they're having moving this case forward? Evidence and information gathered during the investigation indicate that the shooting was related to illegal trafficking of OxyContin. Malik wouldn't explain on the illegal drug angle except to say that the police don't believe Darien was involved in selling or using OxyContin. Other articles would be much more direct about it, and basically it seems like it was her boyfriend's involvement. Malik said that Gerard's level of cooperation has varied during the investigation, but police are no longer in regular contact with him. Troubling. Judy and Wayne Richardson described the heartache and frustration of not knowing who killed their daughter. Each birthday, wedding, and holiday emphasizes the void in their family. We miss Darien every day in every way, Judy Richardson said. We deserve to have answers and justice for Darien. And I'm sure that feeling has not changed in the past 15 years. This is a picture of Gerard. And it's not going to be the last that we hear about him. But I'd mentioned there is another piece of information that in most cases would be the thing to actually crack the case or help break it. And that's where we got to start getting into the story of someone completely unrelated, I think, possibly. Maybe he could be related to this case, but I'm not seeing any conjecture or anything about that. His name is Dedwat Boutsitsi. And he's convicted, as you can see here, to 38 years for a murder. He murdered a roommate of his, and it ties to this case in some way. One of the biggest breaks in the case came when a forensic examination showed that the .45 caliber semi-automatic pistol that Dedwat Boutsitsi used to murder Serge Malongo on February 10th, 2010, was the gun that had been used to shoot Richardson a month earlier. So I don't know if this is 100%. Her mom was kind of leading this way in the podcast interview. But we do know that they collected the bullet from Darien's body after she passed away. So that might have been part of the puzzle in terms of them being able to trace this weapon. I mean, we know that there was other bullets that were at the scene. There was at least two more, should have been at least two more bullets at the scene. But regardless, they did trace the weapon. They traced that it's involved in this other murder. And in a lot of cases, we'd be saying, okay, well, charge this person. But we've got some problems in this instance. Boutsitsi refuses to say where he got the gun. Now, of course, this article was written many years ago. I'm looking at it in hindsight, and I can tell you that through his trial, some information actually did come out. They kind of pressed on him a little bit to explain where he got the gun from. And the basic gist of it was he only got the gun about 20 minutes before the killing that he did. And that effectively he went, I believe he just took it from a friend of his, but he only had the gun about 20 minutes before that. Still, with background checks and everything, shouldn't we be able to trace this gun? Portland detectives worked with the Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives to track down the manufacturer, the distributor, and the gun shop that sold the gun. Police hope that by tracing the trail of ownership, they could get a lead on who Boutsitsi got the gun from. They found the legal owner of record, but then hit a dead end. The owner told police that he sold the gun at a gun show and had no record of who bought it. Unbelievable. This is known as the gun show loophole. So even in a state where you are, if you're a retailer, you actually have to run a background check and get approval of that check before you can give the firearm to the person trying to buy it. Apparently, if you're at a gun show, none of that matters. And if some guy walks up to your table and wants to buy your gun, you can exchange the money, you can give it to him, and that's that. So in terms of, it's so strange to me to think of someone had the foresight to try to put a law into place about, hey, background checks should be run. And there's some information to show that, yeah, there's a lot of people that are stopped from buying firearms because they do not pass that background check. So there's certainly a level of that affecting crime in some way and being helpful. Well, you would hope. But now you've got this aspect. Um, so if they can't buy it from a certified retailer, they're just going to go to the next gun show and, pick it up there. Avoid the background check, not have it traced to them. And there's a couple of different variations on loopholes like that. In one particular state, there's a certain amount of time for the FBI to get back to the retailer with the basically approval or disapproval on the background check. And if it goes beyond 3 days, then the retailer is okay to give it to them anyway. So that's another type of loophole. There's basically several variations on these types of loopholes on the background check. A really troubling aspect when you have a clue like this that should lead you down the path you need to go, and then you hit an aspect like this. It's so weird because if this guy had, I don't know if Craigslist will let you do this, but let's say he posted online about wanting to sell this gun and someone bought it, at least there'd be some traceability around that interaction. You would be able to possibly get the phone number or whatever email address the person was communicating through. I know Craigslist, though, will sometimes use like a proxy email that's only temporary, but then you could subpoena. If it was, I keep using Craigslist as an example because that's just one of the places I figure you would do something like this. But you could subpoena the company and then, get the information about that proxy email address, where it really went. There'd be some method to kind of trace it if this was an internet purchase. The gun show story aspect just changes this whole thing because that introduces this element of like, nope, I was sitting at my table. This person walked up. I have no idea who he is. He had the money. He left with the gun. It just seems to fly in the face of that law that is requiring background checks. Anyone that gets turned down at an authorized gun shop can go to a gun show or a classified advertiser like Uncle Henry's and buy a gun without any background check. So I guess there's actual places that do transactions like that, like Uncle Henry's. I've seen Uncle Henry's referenced a few times around this case. Police say that her boyfriend, Corey Gerard, has been interviewed several times, but denies knowing who the shooters were. Now, there's a couple of different things that I'm troubled with around that. And mainly it's kind of the same points I've been making already. How did this person know what house to go to? How did this person know what bedroom to go to within that house? This had to be someone that at a minimum knew someone that had access to the home. Keep in mind, this isn't a place where they lived there for years and years and years. They had just met each other a few months before that. I don't know if could Corey have been living there possibly longer? That's a possibility. There's really no detail on that. But the other thing here is if Corey isn't being cooperative, you guys have found enough information that it's leading you to the assumption that it has to do with him dealing drugs. Where's that charge? Then lay that charge on him and get him to talk. It seems highly unlikely. It's possible, but it seems highly unlikely that he would just have no idea at all who this was. I think if he was having some type of drug deal disagreement with someone, he'd be very clear, or he would at least have a short list on there's this person that I owed money to, or there's this other person that was upset that I was, dealing in a particular area. He would probably at least have some type of short list. And it seems like police are just not really getting a lot of help from him. And instead of squeezing him for that, just kind of let it go. Time just keeps passing on this case. That might change a couple years down the road. We'll get to that. Gun check might have saved life, parents say. Judy Richardson said she might not be dead if there had been a background check. As the legislative debate over gun control gears up, Darien Richardson's murder is one of the cases cited in Maine and now in Washington, D.C., as proof of the need to require background checks on all private gun sales. So effectively, her parents become advocates for a new type of law that would require a background check for any type of sale. And you would think of, well, how is that reasonable? Like, how can you do that? they kind of made it relatively reasonable. I don't know if it would have been easy to implement, but the idea behind it is if you want to sell a gun privately to another person, you then have to go to an authorized dealer who will run the background check. Now, where I think that kind of falls down a little bit is what's the benefit for the authorized dealer to do this? Why is he going to, oh, sure, I'll just do a bunch of work for you guys for nothing? So I think there'd have to be some form of, you have to pay the authorized dealer $50 or, something for their time for them to go ahead and process that check. What does occur to me is a gun show should have some mechanism here so that they are almost operating like a dealer. I mean, if they're running a show where the intent of that show, one of the intents, I mean, yes, people go to gun shows and they're just there to look at things. But if one of the primary features of that show is the ability to purchase firearms, why don't they have the function there for you to, oh, okay, you want to buy a firearm? Well, we've got to go run a background check. And then the gun show effectively becomes like a middleman operator for, we'll run the background check. If it passes, we'll let the seller know, and then he will, transport the weapon to you in some way, something along those lines. I know gun show enthusiasts are probably shaking their head right now. No, 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 John. I know. Look, like it's going to add a whole other process now that's going to change I went to the gun show. I walked up to the table. I saw what I liked. I bought it. I was at home shooting it that afternoon. They're not going to have that same experience. I get that. But the linchpin that I see for trying to head off, I mean, I'm just looking at this as the gun show aspect is the really problematic aspect here. Like I said, if this was a personal sale, there'd be tracing around that and different things you could do to try to trace that back. I mean, yes, people could use burner phones, blah, blah, blah. There's always ways around that kind of stuff. But to move the line, which is effectively what they're trying to do, the background check, they've got it in the official stores. Where's the next place that you want to move that line to try to make things safer for everybody? I would think is the gun show. And I think you do that with the organizers of the gun show. Basically, if they don't comply, you got to fine them really, really heavily. That's how you would get that kind of thing to work. And then you would move that line a little bit. But, and I'll admit this, all moving that line's going to do is also move the line for the black market. So then it's going to be more, private sales that are happening. If people need to get anything, they're going to get what they're looking for. I mean, how many years have we been fighting the war on drugs? It's just, we know that when people want something, they're going to find a way to get it. So remember that question I asked earlier about what about some charges around the boyfriend here? Maybe just to lead him into some level of cooperation. I wasn't thinking about even running those charges and actually sticking him with them. Well, we get a few years down the road, and that's pretty much what happens. Boyfriend of Portland cold case victim arrested on gun charge. Corey Gerard was taken into custody on a charge of possessing a firearm while being an unlawful user of a controlled substance, marijuana. The charge covers a period of several months, including the night Richardson was shot in 2010. It's unclear whether the arrest indicates a break in the cold case investigation of Richardson's killing. Richardson initially survived wounds to her thigh and hand. Gerard was shot in the arm. When I first started looking into this article, I was starting to consider, was there possibly not a shooter? Was this possibly a domestic violence issue? And I mean, she could have made up the story that she told to her mom to just, try to not blame her boyfriend at the time. I know that she basically goes to live with her family right after that. I believe his family suggested that he go and stay with family in another state, which he did. But just the way this all shook out and was phrased, it just had me wondering about it. Well, and especially with the shot to the hand, I just think of someone struggling, like if there was some kind of argument, a firearm became involved between two people, could someone go and reach for that? They pull the trigger, their hand is effectively covering the gun in some way, and all of a sudden, there's a wound to someone's hand. It just, I don't know, the logistics that we're hearing about here in terms of the actual wounds started becoming kind of questionable to me. And especially with this aspect, details of the charge against Gerard are limited in court filings to the single-page indictment, which accuses him of possessing a Springfield Arms .45 caliber pistol. between October 24th, 2009 and January 8th, 2010. That's the day of the event. That gun is a match for the type, for being a 45. What happened to the gun after January 8th? Could it be that it was given away to someone else or something along those lines? Now, I don't want to get you too excited about these aspects. I'm just trying to share with you where my mind was going when I was first running into this information. Gerard's attorney said that the gun is not the same handgun that his client is accused of possessing. It's not the gun used in the murder. Absolutely not, attorney Michael Whipple said. And I'll confirm for you now, there's other sources that say it's not. It's not the same gun. Whipple said he'll investigate why it took authorities nearly 5 years to bring a charge against his client and will argue for his release. A spokesman for the Portland Police Department, which is investigating Richardson's killing and the shooting of Gerard, declined to comment on whether Gerard's arrest by federal authorities could indicate a break in the case. Important to note there, federal authorities. As for this case, it's still open, it's still active, we're still investigating, said Portland Police Lieutenant James Sweat. If convicted, Gerard faces up to 10 years in prison and a fine of as much as $250,000. Now, I have a question, and I still don't know where to go with this. Why is he being charged for marijuana use? And I'm not, I mean, outside of the fact that at the state level, it should have been at least decriminalized at this point. They had enough information to kind of come to this conclusion that he was dealing or had to do with trafficking an opiate. So why are we talking about, and how much marijuana? I mean, we're talking about personal use here, basically. Why is that the charge? Family friends remember Portland woman killed 5 years ago. Richardson's family and friends gathered for an annual walk to raise money for victims of violent crimes. The family has also lobbied on behalf of laws to expand background checks for purchases of firearms. The federal law is stuck in Congress, and a similar law in Maine was passed by the legislature, but vetoed by the governor. So not only is the family pushing for that, they also push with other families of homicide victims to try to get a cold case squad started at the Attorney General's level, which is something I'm hearing. I don't know if this is kind of a trend that's been happening over the past few years, but I'm hearing this as kind of a landing spot for, especially for families that are unhappy with how the investigations have gone with their local law enforcement. They're hoping to get the Attorney General's office to kind of look at these cases, sometimes if they're cold cases, and just kind of reinvestigate them almost from the start. So basically, Darien's parents kind of join a push for that as well. Her mother testified in favor of a bill that would create a 4-person investigative squad within the Attorney General's office devoted to cold cases. We can send a message that our state will not give up on these cases, she said. I'm aware that there is a cost, but what is the cost of a human life? What is the price for a family? We already paid the highest price. So I'm not sure exactly where that has shaken out in Maine in particular, but I know in other cases and other families that I'm dealing with, I'm hearing that some of them are having success with that they are actually having cases reinvestigated by the AG's office. And this is Gerard several years later, and it looks like he's probably, I don't know if he's dressed for court in this particular photo, but boyfriend of Portland cold case murder victim sentenced to 18 months on gun charge. So they ran it all the way through. Typically, you'll see something like this, and they'll just kind of use it as a way to get him back into an interview room. That's not what happened here. Or if it is, maybe they weren't happy with what they got in that interview room, and they wanted to keep it going. Gerard, 27, stood in U.S. District Court in Portland during the sentencing hearing and apologized to his family and friends who were there to support him, and to the parents of the late Darien Richardson, seated in the back of the courtroom. Every day I have this guilt on my shoulders, he said. It's almost a relief to get sentenced. I don't know why he would feel like that, or why he would make that statement if he really had done all he could to try to find the person that shot him as well and killed his girlfriend. It's kind of a strange statement. After being arrested on the federal charge, Gerard began cooperating with detectives working on Richardson's case. So apparently there was some level of cooperation that happened there. After he was charged, he provided a level of cooperation to state and local authorities. Interesting that they're saying a level of cooperation. It just makes me think maybe it wasn't complete. That resulted in legal processes that moved the murder case forward slightly, said Assistant U.S. Attorney Darcy McElwee. McElwee argued during the sentencing hearing that Gerard's illegal business selling drugs is what led him to interact with other drug dealers who Portland police suspected in the shooting. This was incredibly reckless and unfortunately dangerous behavior that resulted in a tragedy, McElwee said. It's interesting hearing that conclusion as well, because if they prove that enough to actually get that charge to stick, I would think there would be a chance that Darien's family could also sue in a civil suit for wrongful death. At the time of the shooting, Gerard was dealing large amounts of oxycodone between New York and Maine. McElwee wrote in a prosecution document filed within the court. The firearm was seized by the Portland police from the bedroom on the night of the shooting. So there's our answer about why he doesn't have the firearm after that night. It was seized by police. Also seized from the bedroom that same night were approximately 193 counterfeit 80 milligram OxyContin pills and approximately 2.7 grams of marijuana. On about January 8th, the defendant was a daily user of marijuana and had been since the time of the firearm purchase in October 2009, having smoked marijuana as recently as the night of the shooting. 2.7 grams, I think that's somewhere between $20 to $50 worth of marijuana. That is obviously personal use. That's not him having anything to do with selling marijuana. And it's interesting to me, maybe this is part of the story here. I was wondering why they didn't charge him for the trafficking. What they found were counterfeit pills. Could that have been part of the problem? Could that have been what upset someone? Did someone buy from him, go and sell that to someone else? All of a sudden they had a bunch of users that were saying, what are you selling me? This stuff is garbage. And that caused the problem. Did he know that they were counterfeit? I don't know. But them being counterfeit, I don't know if you could still hold a charge on that. If you guys have some thoughts on that, tell me about it in the comments down below. I'm not sure. The judge listened during the hearing as Gerard described overcoming his addiction to opiates a couple years after Richardson's death and how he has turned his life around since then, reconnecting with his friends and family. That's interesting. So he winds up effectively admitting to not just being a marijuana user, to using opiates. It's often said that drugs and weapons are a recipe for disaster, the judge said. Here's the case that proves what the combination of drugs and weapons can do. You purchased this weapon you had because you thought you needed the protection because of the activities you were involved in. It's a really good point. And once again, it's making me wonder about civil suit around that. But her parents were sitting there. They chose not to speak to the press, however. Portland police seek public's help. This is the start of a run of articles that I've seen basically this started about 5 years ago, and effectively now every year on the anniversary, there's a new push over and over and over. They're asking for help. They're asking for help. There's no real solid information that we have. We have no description of the assailants. We think it might be two. The articles are talking about one shooter in particular, so it seems like we are talking about one weapon, but possibly two people. But we don't know. We don't know anything about these people. Is it a man and a woman? Is it two men? What were they wearing? Hair color, eye color, height, weight? We've got nothing. Darien is not forgotten, said Police Chief Frank Clark. One of our most crucial and awesome responsibilities is investigating the death of another human being. Our detectives will continue to review and seek new information that might bring those responsible for such violence to justice. On the anniversary of her death, if anyone has any information that might help Darien and her family, please give us a call. And if you have any information, please do pick up the phone. You can contact Detective Tully at 207-874-8550, or you could also contact Detective Druan at 207-874-8550. 8592. If you need to remain anonymous for any reason, there is also a tip line. It's a recorded, like an answering machine. You can just call, leave the information there. That's 207-874-8584. There's a couple of other ways if you want to text or if you'd rather do it through a website. I've got those details in the description box down below. Continuing to the following year, Portland Police plea for public's help. Families offering a $15,000 reward. As far as I know, that reward still available for collecting on this case. The following year, new leads sought in Darien Richardson's case. 24 hours ago, Portland police revived search for suspect in 2010 shooting. The hard thing is we have no description. So this is one of those cases where they're asking for social information. They're asking for someone that might have heard something, someone that might have seen something. Maybe there's some other neighbor that was there that night that saw a mystery vehicle or people running from the home, something along those lines. We have no description on the suspect that we're looking for. So this is one of those cases where we really need to raise the awareness. We need people to know about it and hopefully help this family with this. And that's as this family looks to help other families avoid a similar situation. This was written by Judy and Wayne Richardson and published at everytown.org in October of 2023. It's not too late to prevent more tragedies. Our daughter had her entire life ahead of her, with much more to contribute to the world. She was beautiful and vibrant with a zest for life. She had a big, infectious smile that drew everyone to her. Darien was kind, compassionate, helpful, and generous. She sought out and found only the good in everyone she met. A social butterfly who loved music and loved to dance, she was intelligent, accomplished, hardworking, and a valued member of our society. Darien was loved and is missed by all who knew her. Her death devastated our family. Darien should be here still. She should have been in her sister's wedding, not on a photo and a charm attached to her sister's bouquet. She should have been here to help me plan and host her sister's baby shower. She should be here now to enjoy her baby nephew. She would love being an auntie. She should be here. She should have been able to live the full and bright life she deserved. But Darien's homicide has never been solved, and dangerous loopholes in our country's background check system are partly to blame. It's too late for us. We can't have Darien back, but it's not too late to prevent more tragedies. We honor her memory by advocating for better gun laws and to close those dangerous loopholes. Lives matter more than politics. One victim of gun violence is too many. And I just want to be clear because I know I cut around some areas there. They are a family that knows about gun use. They're not suggesting that we need to get rid of all guns. They are looking very particularly at closing those loopholes, making some type of mechanism where background checks are required for private sales as well. Now, between that and the work that they're doing to try to get cold cases looked at the AG's office, they have something else that they have taken on over at rememberingdarien.org, and that is helping other victims of violent crimes. The vision of Remembering Darien is to help innocent victims of violent crimes to heal and rebuild their lives in the aftermath of incomprehensible violence. Victims of violent crime are often unable to work, making it impossible to pay rent, student loans, or even afford basic necessities such as groceries. Remembering Darien was formed by Darien's friends and family to combat this societal shortcoming by raising money to help ease these financial and emotional burdens. A very worthy cause, and of course, on behalf of myself and my wonderful supporters through PayPal, Patreon, coffee, merchandise sales, and just by being sure that you watch the few ads that we run here on YouTube, we have already made a donation to Remembering Darien to help them with that mission of helping others. So you might be wondering what happened with the legislation. LD 999 is what it is called in Maine, and it looks like they made another push with it in 2021. Based on what I'm seeing here, it looks like it's basically not passing at this time. I think they're going to keep making tweaks to it and hoping that it eventually gets through. What's surprising to me is also from 2021, Pew Research Center did a poll, And they're noting right off the top here, and I just want to restate this because we all agree with it. Few issues are as politically polarizing as gun policy. Today, just over half of Americans say gun laws should be stricter than they currently are. But this survey that they did was from April 5th to the 11th. In 2021, it was over 5,000 adults that were surveyed. And of that, 81% favor subjecting private gun sales and sales at gun shows to background checks. So it seems like the support for this type of thing is there. Like I said, I know there are challenges in the thought of how to actually get it done. And until those are ironed out in a way where I think everyone is seeing the benefits, I think that's why we're going to see this kind of keep bouncing back. And I don't know if it's as simple as just the contingencies I was talking about like why are the gun shop owners going to do this extra work and take that on. I think there needs to be some mutual benefit for all involved to pick up that part of the process and make it work for them as well. But there might be other challenges. It kind of blows my mind to see that a research poll is showing 80% of people support this. I read one of the versions of this legislature. It's not long. It's not deep or intense. It's fairly straightforward. Why is it getting kicked back? I'm not exactly sure. And there's other groups here at ABC News. Some of the nation's top police leaders have also voiced support for universal background checks. The Major Cities Chiefs Association, a network of police executives representing the 79 largest cities in the US and Canada, called for establishing a strong system for universal background checks to cover all firearm purchases and close the internet sale and gun show loopholes. It will be challenging to truly address the gun violence threat without closing these loopholes, since guns will continue to be sold to those who are not permitted under the law to possess one, the group said in a statement. But years on, Darien Richardson's family continues to fight for universal background checks. In her case, while a background check may not have prevented the shooter from getting their hands on a gun and killing her in the first place, it would have at least put the sale on record and made it easier to trace it back to the shooter. For that, her family feels like it's an appropriate place to start. It's gotten worse even since we've gotten involved, Judy said. What's it going to take? And that's a good question indeed. I wanted to honor Darien's story by keeping in the way that her family is choosing to honor her memory, and that is by raising that point. I agree. I don't think that it would have been the end all be all to possibly save her life. It could have been that the person that got that gun from wherever they got it would have just gotten another gun from some other mechanism. But the tracing of that would have had a higher percentage. And that's another thing. None of these solutions are going to be bulletproof. It's about moving that line. And there are enough stats to show that the line where it's at right now is having some kind of impact. Having it at the licensed dealer level is at least getting some usable information back to law enforcement that can be helpful. Pushing that line a little farther down seems like it could be more helpful to law enforcement. Is that a terrible outcome? I don't think so. And I think that's one of those things. I think that's why the stats are showing 80% of that group of 5,000 that were polled think that that's reasonable. I'm sure there's gun owners that were part of that polling as well. Before we go, just a few more links to let you know about. In the description box down below, you'll find a link to rememberingdarien.org. If you'd like to make another donation yourself, please do so there. Of course, also another thank you to Downeast. There are 2 episodes on this case. If you only have time to listen to one of them, I'd say listen to the first one, because it's basically Judy just speaking from her heart about everything she knows about the case and everything that she observed around the happening of it. And of course, the emotional roller coaster that came with this as well. A big thank you to everyone that supports us here at the channel. If you do that through Patreon, PayPal, by buying merchandise, or even buying us a coffee, we really appreciate it. It's how we're able to do these presentations with limited ads. I don't want you guys being stuck in some 5-minute commercial in the middle of this video. So we don't do that, and we can only make that happen because of our supporters. If you can't support in that way, please consider just hitting the thumbs up, the thumbs down, or leaving a comment. All of that engagement basically tells YouTube, show this video to more people, And outside of trying to be helpful to a case that needs it, we're 15 years down the road. There's some other important conversation that I think comes up around this case as well. Certainly something worth possibly sharing with friends. So a big thank you to everyone that does that. Take care, everyone. Have a nice weekend. We'll see you again here next week on the Lord and Arch channel.